Thank you for joining Think, Build, Launch podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Sertl. This program is an extension of Marl Startup Studio. Marl Startup Studio was started to support students and first-time founders of all ages while they're in the idea stage of their startup. We believe there are so many ideas that are left behind because some people don't actually know the structure to take their idea into an actionable plan, and that is exactly what we do. My guest today is Zack Marshall, the founder and CEO of Conterra, an early-stage startup building a marketplace for private security. Now, this is so interesting. Self-proclaimed computer science dropout, Zack served 10 years in the military as a Navy SEAL. He then moved to San Francisco to join a robotics startup. Thankfully, he's moved back to Rochester to add his expertise to the private security industry marketplace. But in addition to being part of 3 startups, he's also the father to 4 children and believes that the family story is as important as the entrepreneurship story. Thank you for being here, Zack.
Thanks for having me.
That's great. So what is your initial relationship to Rochester? What brought you back from San Francisco to Rochester?
Yeah, so I grew up in Rochester. So did my wife. We've got both of our sets of parents are here. So for the kids, it's their grandparents.
That's great. I am so excited of so many boomerangs, the idea that people do move away and then choose to come back to Rochester to start their companies and to have the quality of life and entrepreneurship that's here. I think that's amazing. I also want to acknowledge you for one of the reasons that Marl Startup Studio is here in Rochester. I understand that you built some relationships in San Francisco with our founders, Prakash and Amir. And actually, it was an idea that you had that kind of helped build the bridge here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be back in Rochester. I think my wife did as well. We're glad to be in the city limits. Even with the kids, we live downtown and plan to always be here. You know, there's just so much talent here. There's, growing up, there's artists, there's musicians. We have a punk scene that other cities don't have. We've lived in San Francisco, San Diego. I've spent a ton of time in New York City, and we still love Rochester. The food is great. The people are great. It was clear that the startup ecosystem, the bolder thesis, should be here. I did misstep a little when I first was coming back to the city, traveling back and forth from San Francisco, and tried to bring the bolder thesis, Brad Feld's idea on startup communities, and I foot in the mouth, I was preaching this to the choir, right? A lot of the folks here were already excited about startups. They were way ahead of me. So I misstepped there, but it was clear that there's a ton of room. And, I believe in the idea that rising tides lifts all boats. I believe in the idea that the more opportunities for entrepreneurs to find their thing. So getting Marl here is a huge win for Rochester.
That's great. Well, we're very lucky here. Being a Navy SEAL, I did a little bit of research, and they have approximately 4,000 people that they accept as recruits annually, and only 6% actually make it. And I think of kind of the research from TechCrunch on startups is that 20% of businesses fail in their first year, and around 60% will go bust within their first 3 years. So I'm thinking of can you help us learn some of the principles of strategy that you learned in being a Navy SEAL that actually might also apply to entrepreneurship?
Sure. I mean, the real basic is never quit, right? Like very few businesses, unless you have debt, are actually bust. It's your business. You can build it forever. And, I've spoken to a lot of venture capitalists over the past 4 years, especially raising money for this company that I started last June. And it's clear that a major fear of first-time founders, probably the number one fear, is that they just don't stick with it. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any entrepreneur in the world who failed an entrepreneurship career without quitting. Like, I'm not saying that quitting is always the bad choice. You can choose, there's 1,000 ways to change your life and to move on, to do something different. But having that attitude, I mean, we had 270 people go into pre-buds with me, and 17 of that class graduated. And most of those folks were in better shape than me, right? They decided that being a SEAL wasn't worth it anymore for whatever reason. Don't quit.
That's amazing. I see some books in the background. Are there any really good books that you think that every founder should read?
Yeah, I think Steve Blank is better than Eric Ries. So if you're going to read, if someone's telling you to read Lean Startup, I would go to the father of that. I believe the Entrepreneurship Handbook might be the name of it. It's one of my favorites where he really breaks down like the 90s version of the Lean Startup and what it means. And the lessons learned are incredible. There's definitely more of a step-by-step method, just like the Disciplined Entrepreneurship Handbooks. And then I think memoirs are really important, whether you're going to read about Steve Jobs or Ben Franklin or whoever. These people, when you look at their lives, it was never this track towards success. It was a constant shift between one thing and the next, all in some general direction toward who they became.
That's great. When I'm like the idea of you coming back, does Rochester feel different than when you left? And if so, how? And what do you think that we need to do to, with your new business and what you're doing, what do we need to do to strengthen to make you even more successful with this new entity that you have?
Yeah, Rochester is, it's a trendy city. As much as we're small, each of these little niches is pretty on trend. Our food is on trend. I think the startup scene is on trend, but it requires a large amount of effort by the people who are in whatever scene they're in, right? So when I left Rochester, I was young, going off to college. I don't know how different it is today, but I can tell you that downtown there's like something like 700 brand new apartments all around, Parcel 5 and the Liberty Pole area. There's startup coffee, or there's grinds, there's Rock Roast, there's the Open Coffee Club. There's all these different ways to get plugged in. I don't know. I think as an entrepreneur that, where I hope things go to support is just the more we can work, the more connected we can become, right? And unfortunately, I don't think there's anything anybody can do except to do it. So like, for example, if I want an entrepreneur dinner to be similar to one that I went to in San Francisco, nobody else is going to do it. I need to go find a bunch of entrepreneurs who all have 5 employees or more and be like, hey, let's meet up, let's have dinner, and we're going to do it quarterly. And that can't be done by anybody but the folks in the room.
That's the neat thing about you going away and coming back, because we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes our experience is limited by our experience. So it's so great. Is that a practice that you have? Do you call it like the founder dinner process, or what do you call that process that you have?
So that's not as much of a process, except that's probably the first goal on my checklist for the town myself, is to have an entrepreneur dinner that becomes a thing that we quarterly do. But I think you nailed something else there, which is like, you got to move to your Mecca. If you're into food and you want to be a chef, go move to New York. If you're going to be a startup founder, go move to San Francisco. If you're going to be any of these things, but that doesn't mean you have to stay there. You go to learn. I dropped out of college. My college was going to 3 to 5 events a week in San Francisco for 18 months with a wife and 3 kids in a tiny apartment. And that was part of the deal. Why we moved there was so that I could get exposure to that, meet these people, and build those relationships. Okay, I want everybody to start their companies in Rochester. I moved back here to start it here because I knew it'd be easier for me to build the company here for a lot of reasons. But I would never trade going and learning at my Mecca, which for at the time was San Francisco.
I love that. So everyone move to your Mecca, and also build the Mecca, as we're hoping to do. I look forward to the day that people say, if you want to do a startup, move to Rochester, which is something certainly that we are working on, which is incredible. Sure. What's so neat about, you and your background, and I literally do hope that you write a book sometime about the principles of being a Navy SEAL and how it applies to entrepreneurship, because I just feel like there's so much there. So the other thing that I think was so great was how important it was when we did our kind of due diligence for this call, was that you had 3 startups that you were proud of, and then you were also proud of being a father of 4. What has being a father taught you about entrepreneurship, or is there anything else we can learn about that role?
Yeah, it's a repeat lesson that's been across my life, but you just can't control everything. So when you have one kid, you go, oh, well, this kid is going to be the best kid ever. We've got this perfect timeline. They're going to go to bed at this certain time every day. Exact foods, you're checking calendars on an app to figure out if your kid's walking on time or something. By the 4th kid, you're like, okay, as long as everybody's alive and generally moving toward college someday or not, we're okay. And I think that's the same in startups. It's the same across. It's like across the board. You can't control 95% of it. So you got to control the 5% you've got. And honestly, that was probably my biggest mistake in the first 6 months of this startup of Conterra, was trying to have already built the startup I imagined, right? So not maybe the success yet. I knew that would come later, but you read these books, and by the time you go start your company, you're like, I know how to do this. I've raised money in these companies. I've worked with these teams. I know how to do equity-based recruiting that's really powerful and build a culture. I know how to build a business process that makes it so expensing is really simple for everybody. I know how to use all the, you know how to do it all, but you just can't. You can't do all of that at once as one person or 2 people in a company. And you really have to, just like parenting 4 kids or more, you have to go with the flow and control what you can control and continue to make sure that, let's say at home, maybe your home values are still getting pushed forward. At work, it's the vision and our values are still moving forward as we keep this thing going. Wow.
If what I hear in you is, in a way, familiarity can be dangerous, right? In that when we take an other model and try and apply it to a current situation, the situation may have changed so much that we actually may not be accurate in our read because of assumptions. And what the agility of family life kind of helps support you in is actually having current situational awareness. Am I hearing the soundbite accurately?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe to summarize it, it's like, don't copy other people and don't try to control everything. Keeping up with the Joneses, right, would be the family version. And keeping up with other startups or trying to do what other startups did. Like, everything I've done wrong, not everything, most of what I've done wrong in the last 13 months has been me trying to build my startup like somebody else, how they built theirs.
That's, so in terms of really the essence of what we're learning from Zack is that the idea of move to your Mecca isn't to copy and paste the Mecca. It's actually to immerse yourself and strengthen your situational awareness, and then take that back to wherever you think that you and your family or your lifestyle will absolutely thrive. There's so much here. I'm sure that we'll have you back as a guest again. You've been joining us at Think Build Launch. Thank you. I would also like to thank Startup Grind Rochester, Upstate Venture Connect, Upstate Capital New York, Next Core, RIT, and University of Rochester for all of your partnership with Marl Startup Studio and the collaboration that we've seen in the community for this tipping point that we have here in Rochester. I'd also like to thank our producer, Scott Fitzgerald at Rockvox Studio. If you have an idea and want to know more about our program, connect with me, Jennifer, at marlaccelerator.com. Please subscribe to our program, and we'll continue to provide information and inspiration about taking your idea from a concept to a business. This is Jennifer Sertl. Thank you for joining us.